Hello everyone, this is Jake Smeester, Content Creative Specialist for Amazon Sumerian, and welcome to our fourth episode of introducing Amazon Sumerian here on Twitch. We are excited for this week's episode where we're going to be looking at chatbots using Sumerian hosts and Amazon Lex. I am joined as usual by Ben Moore, our lead product manager.
Hey Jake, thanks for having me on again.
You are very welcome, Ben. I'm glad you're here.
Me too.
So Ben and I are going to be talking about Sumerian hosts a little bit more and a little bit about Amazon Lex. Amazon Lex is a text, let me make sure, define that for me, Ben, because I'm drawing a blank.
Amazon Lex is a service provided by AWS that gives you the ability to translate natural speech, so what I'm doing right now, talking to you, and change it into a text string. So for instance, if you were speaking to a chat bot in your voice, it would take your voice and it would turn it into a text string so you could run some analysis on it. So for instance, maybe what's the sentiment of what you're asking, or perhaps what would I like to do? Maybe I want to book a hotel room, or maybe I want to create a dinner reservation. So Amazon Lex is the service that allows you to do that. On the flip side, there's Amazon Polly, which changes that text string into natural language and provides a audio version of that text string. So then you can get a response.
Cool. I toss it over to Ben because I oftentimes confuse text to speech and speech to text. So thank you for clarifying that, just so I wasn't saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Looking at the chat room, we got a few different people on here. New people, the Magic Lamp, welcome. Glad you are here. And let's see, who else said they were new? I feel like I saw somebody else. DJ MKY, cool, glad you're here. Chicken Bromain, that's a great name. Plus Zero. And let's see, I thought I saw somebody else. Okay, so anyway, we got a few new people on here. S. Sosina, that's the other one I was looking at. So glad you guys are joining us. Please be asking any questions you guys have. It doesn't have to be relevant to what I'm talking about. It can be kind of off the wall. We'll do our best to answer. One quick thing is we want to encourage everybody to join slack.sumerian.world. That is our Slack channel. And we're getting a really great community there. A lot of people are joining and asking questions, posting their scenes that they've created into our showcase channel. Looks like Ben, did you type that in? Ben's going to type that in for you.
I'll add it to the chat channel for you.
Slack.sumerian.world. So anyway, there's a lot of conversation going on over there. So today, what we are covering is Sumerian hosts using Amazon Lex to create a chatbot. Let me just get rid of this agenda and tutorial. There we go. Make it a little bit better. All right, I'm going to jump over to my screen. Here we are in our dashboard, and a few things to note. Some updates that we have made is that when you change your region, you have basically a whole new set of scenes. And so just be aware of that. So I do have a much smaller set of scenes than I have, but the reason I'm choosing North Virginia or East 1, the reason I'm doing that is because Lex, as far as I believe, is still, I shouldn't say only is limited to the regions, specifically North Virginia. So that's why I'm actually creating scenes in this region, because otherwise it wouldn't work.
So Jake, maybe for those people that are new to AWS, we can talk about regions for a second.
Please.
So Amazon Sumerian is a service that allows you to author augmented reality, virtual reality, and 3D scenes, and then publish them to a URL and view them from a compatible browser. Now, AWS as a company provides infrastructure as a service. So there are many building blocks. We went over this a little bit earlier with Amazon Lex and Amazon Polly briefly. But part of what makes these services so reliable is the ability to choose which region you use the service in. And a region is a geographic location where there are what we call availability zones. And availability zones are data centers where these services reside and where you can store your information. So specifically when Jake is saying you can choose your region, Amazon Sumerian is available in 6 regions today, and the one that he's choosing is the one that he's been working off of, and so it has all of the data that he's been doing. If he was to switch to another region, that information wouldn't be there. He would have to recreate his scene, so to speak.
Cool. Great. Thanks for filling that in. Jumping back to my dashboard, you can tell that I am in North Virginia by selecting it up here. So I will be sticking in North Virginia. And I have a few scenes here. If you've been following along, you don't have to. It's not necessary to follow along or to seen the prior episodes to follow along here. But if you have followed along, you might recognize that some of these scenes have been created in past episodes. And it is completely irrelevant to really what we're doing today. But just as a heads up, that the stuff that you're going to see in my scene, I'll go ahead and open it. You don't have to have it in there. Again, it's mainly just for looks, and it has to do with just some nice background and to show a few other things in our scene. But it has nothing to do with the functionality of this particular demo we're doing. Let's see. So if there are no other questions regarding that, I will go ahead and jump into it. All right. So I'm here in a scene. Like I said, these are some things I've created in past episodes. This is 2 walls and a floor, and then some furniture that we've brought in from the asset library. I'll just show you where to find all those assets. If you go to import assets up here above the canvas, it will open up the asset library. These are assets and objects that we have provided for you free of use, and so you can find them here. And we are updating this on a fairly regular basis, so be checking that out. One thing that is fairly new in the last couple weeks, is Luke. The Luke host, which we are going to be using today. If you scroll down, you'll see some of those pieces of furniture that are in the scene. But for now, the only thing I'm going to add for this demo is Luke. So I'll go ahead and select Luke and add him to my scene. And while he is loading, he will populate down here in the assets panel. Excuse me. And then we're going to add him to the canvas. And there he is. To add anything from the assets panel, you need to find the entity, the asset type entity, which is always next to this little hexagon icon. So if you find that hexagon icon, that's always what you want to drag from the assets panel onto your scene canvas to get that object into your scene, or in this case, a host. So Luke will be loading here. We'll see him shortly in the middle of this room. All right, let's back up a little bit to do some housekeeping to make sure to ensure that this scene works properly. As we mentioned and has been talked about, we were using Amazon Lex. Amazon Lex is a service, an AWS service that you can find in the AWS console, and so it's a separate service that is just being integrated here within a Sumerian scene. To do that, we need to make sure that we are adding proper credentials here in the AWS configuration. So I found that by clicking the top level entity in the entities panel in the AWS configuration. So if you're ever using a host and using Amazon Poly, Amazon Lex, and a lot of other services, you need to make sure that you have a Cognito Identity Pool ID that you have created uniquely for this scene. And to do that, if you jump over to this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and post this tutorial in the chat room. There we go. There it is. This tutorial is, we're pretty much going to be walking through this tutorial in this demo. But there is a template that we need to access from this tutorial, and I've realized that I need to update this to make it a little more clear. But under step 1, it says use this AWS CloudFormation stack template. I'm going to click on that link and open that up. And what this does is this creates a unique stack of services from AWS that stands them up and then creates an ID that we're going to plug into our Sumerian scene so that so our scene is able to access them. I've already done some of this legwork already just to save some time, because it does take some loading time and I don't want to wait for it. But I will walk you through what you need to do. You just click this I acknowledge, you click create. Let's see. Oh, this already exists. That's why. So I'm actually not going to do it. What this does is when you find this, when you get this stack created, you go to the output section of that new page, and then you'll find the Cognito Identity Pool ID. And so you copy that and then you bring it back here to Sumerian console. And I already have one, so I'm just going to copy and paste that right here. So it's going to be a string that looks something like that. And you're pretty much done in terms of including the Cognito identity pool. It's a really simple process, it's just a couple clicks. And to go back there, well, we'll get to that in a second. We do need to look at a specific Lex bot we're going to be using. And we can get to that in a moment, so we'll cover that shortly. All right, so I have Luke in my scene. We have the Cognito identity pool ID. We have Luke. We got everything we need to get going here. So I'm going to select Luke, and I'm going to grab these handles, and I have the translation handles. That is the location within my scene. So if I have this button selected up here, I can grab these arrows or these handles to move him around. And if I unfold the transform component, you'll notice that those values are changing as I move him around. If this would open for me, there we go. As I move him around, you see those values are moving around and changing. And I'm going to move him right here towards the front of the room. And then I'm going to choose the rotate button to change to these rings, which I can then rotate him to face the camera a little bit better. All right, so that's good. And then I'm using the editor camera to zoom in and adjust. There we go. To adjust my scene, so I'm looking a little bit more closely at Luke. There we go. All right. So let's see. Host. We want him to look at the camera that we're using, so I'm going to unfold the host. Let's see. Host component. Almost a property. Host component. Open that. This point of interest, it's right now set to none, so I'm going to open that up. I'm going to select look at entity, and I'm going to take this default camera. With the default camera is the camera that you will be viewing the scene from, and so if he is following that camera around, he will essentially be looking at you as you look at him. So I will grab the default camera and drop it right there on the target entity input. And to demonstrate what that looks like, we did cover this briefly, actually not briefly, a little more in depth last week. Play the scene, there we go, once it gets loaded. And as you see, as I move around, as I orbit around my camera in the scene, his head follows me, his neck and his head are operating kind of independently, as are his eyes. You notice that his eyes are just following me right now, but then as I move a little bit more, then his head moves. So really good animation, really good rig that has been built on these hosts. All right, so that's the host component. I'm just going to go close that. The speech component. We're not going to be creating any separate speeches. That was last week's episode. But you can change the voice of him. Right now, even though this is our host, Luke, it's using the Amazon Polly voice, Russell, which has an Australian accent, which I find very cool, so I'm going to leave. And then I don't really need to do anything under the speech component. I do need to add one more component, which is the dialogue component. And the dialogue component is going to basically be connected to Amazon Lex. And so if we open the AWS console, I'll go ahead and click that button. I probably did that a little too fast. Over here in the dialogue component, we have a bot, and then the name and the alias, and then open AWS console. That takes me over here. So this opens up Amazon Lex. And you'll see a list of all these different bots that we have created. And if you click on one of these bots, it takes you into Amazon Lex. And this is where you can actually edit your chat bot or your Lex bot. Excuse me. We're not going to be doing much with this. What we're going to be doing is using a sample bot that's provided by Amazon Lex. So to do that, let me see. I'll back up a little bit. I'll show you how to create that sample bot. If I'm here in my list of bots in Amazon Lex, I just click create, and then I can create a custom bot. I can use the book trip, order flowers, or schedule appointment samples. I'm going to be using the book trip bot. And so to do that, you just select it, and then you scroll down, select yes or no to this option here, and then click create. I've already created one. It takes a couple minutes to spin it up, so I don't need to do that right now. And if I jump in here to the bot editor, you'll see a few different things. There are intents. Intents are really like the different kind of paths you can go down with your conversation. So in this sample, we have book car and book hotel. So we can talk to our host to either book a car or book a hotel. And each one is initiated by these utterances up here: make a car reservation, reserve a car, or book a car. And then after, excuse me, I need some water. After you start the dialogue, down below are these slots. And these slots you can edit. So you have his response over here. You have the input that you can provide as the voice or as the user. So you can edit all of this stuff here. This is already set up, so we're really not really going to touch it. We're just going to leave it as it is. But we can do, probably in some later broadcasts, we can get a little bit more into Amazon Lex. All right, so I'm going to jump back to, one other thing I need to show you. Settings. If we go to settings, you can create different aliases for your chatbot, your Lex bot. And that really acts like a version of your bot. And so I created one that I just called Twitch. And so that's an important part to know. So as we jump back here into Sumerian, you need to provide the name of your bot, which was Book Trip, and the alias, which is Twitch. And for the most part, I made a couple small tweaks to it, but it's really just the same sample bot that Amazon Lex has provided. So not much difference. And that's all we need to do in the dialogue component. So I will go ahead and close that. All right. Now, to get him to actually start interacting, what we need to do, per usual, is add a state machine behavior so we can start interacting with him. And I haven't looked at the chat room. We good on questions over here? Anything that I need to address?
Nope, we're doing well. But Donuts and Pizza Are Life just gave you a shout out. So welcome back, by the way.
Oh, Donuts and Pizza Are Life. Hello there. It's good to have you back here. Such a great screen name. All right, state machine. State machine, if you aren't familiar with state machine, that is really what creates behaviors and interactivity within a scene. If it wasn't for the state machine, there really wouldn't be a lot of movement, or you really couldn't interact with the scene. It's what allows there to be interactions, behaviors, changes within your scene. It can also interact with outside services like Amazon Lex, which is what we will be doing as well. And so we don't have any behaviors right now, and I'm still selected on Luke. I am attaching a behavior to Luke himself. So I will add a behavior by clicking this plus button, and this opens up the state machine editor. All right, I have some notes over here that I will be referencing just to make sure that I get all of this correct. We have a few different states. We have about 6 states we're going to create with several different actions attached to them. The first one is we're going to call start. I'm just renaming it. So I have a state selected over here. I should actually rename the behavior. We're going to call it chatbot. So there's one state currently in our scene, and I'm renaming it start, and I'm going to add an action. So renaming a state doesn't do anything. It's just for your own reference. To make it do something, you need to add an action. So I click Add Action, and I'm looking for the AWS SDK Ready action. This is going to be set as our initial state, and so when we press play, it will initiate the AWS SDK within our scene. Ben, would you mind explaining a little bit more about the AWS SDK?
Sure. So the AWS SDK allows you to access other AWS services in your Sumerian scene. So for instance, if you want to call data from a database table, you would use the text editor that's built into Sumerian, and you would make an API call using JavaScript within that script that you're writing. The AWS SDK is what allows you to make that call. And so what Jake is doing by adding the AWS SDK to the state here is he's making sure that it initializes all the connections to the services that are being used in the scene that he's creating when the scene loads. So it basically is ensuring that Lex and Polly work as he's creating this chatbot.
Cool. Yeah, so that's the first state we need to add to our scene, or the first action we need to add to our scene. So we have start. So as soon as we press play, it will initiate the AWS SDK, and we don't really need to return to it at all. And you'll see what I mean by that here shortly. All right, we need to add another state, so we'll click Add State over here in the top left-hand corner. I'll zoom out here a bit using my scroll wheel, and we're going to rename this state Wait for Input. And we're going to add an action, and we're going to search for the key down action, and basically we are going to be recording our voice using our microphone, and the microphone or the recording will start once we press a button. So we can choose whatever button we want. For the key, right now it's set to A by default. I'm going to choose the space bar. And then we're going to add another state. That's all we need for that one. So we'll add another state, and we'll call this one Start Recording. All right, and the action we will look for is the Start Microphone Recording action. So we'll add that one. And let's see, we need to add one more action, which is Key Up. We'll add this, we'll search for Key Up, add that action, and then we'll likewise to the Key Down action, we'll make it the space bar. I'll explain how all this works, and you can actually see it really clearly in action when we're working, or when we're using the scene. All right, the next state we need is Stop Recording, so I'll add another state. Stop Recording is what I'll call it, and then we will add action, which is Stop Microphone Recording. Okay, and two more states. We will add a state another time, and we're going to call this one Process with Lex. And the action we want attached to it is send send audio input to DialogBot. So I'll add that action. And one more state, which is the play response. If you joined us last week, you remember that there is to start a speech, you need to add the start speech action. And we'll find it here. However, what's unique about this situation is that we don't have a speech that we wrote. It's going to pull from the Amazon Lex bot that we created, the sample bot, and so it's actually going to have those responses. And so if I jump over here to the Amazon Lex, you'll notice that these responses over here where it says, in what city do you need to rent a car, and what day do you want to start your reservation? You can't see all of it right here, but that is actually what our host will be saying here. And maybe I should I'm going to move myself on this side. I just realized that I'm kind of blocking there. Okay, get myself out of the way. So let me go through these real quickly one more time. So we have start. This is our initial state, and the only action we have on here is the AWS SDK. The next one we have is the wait for input, and we have the key down action, and we selected the space bar to be the key that we're going to be using to initiate. The next state is the start recording, and we added two states to this one, start microphone recording and then key up. And we're also using the space bar as the key that is registering to go up. And then stop recording is our next state, and the only action we have on there is the stop microphone recording action. Next is the process with Lex action, process with Lex state, and the action that we use is the send audio input to DialogBot. Kind of a long name. You can select these log user input or log bot response, and that's for the console. So you're welcome to do that. I don't really need to this time. And then lastly is this last state, which is the play response state. And the only one that we have on here, the only action is the start speech. And oh, I almost forgot to do this. I always forget to do this one. You need to select the use Lex response. So there's really two options. You can select your own speech that you've created, and again, that was last week's episode. But in this case, we want to use the Lex response. All right, so we have all of our states, and now we need to wire them up with transitions so they will work properly. And to do that, you need to select in the, click within this transition label, which is below the state, and drag the transition or the arrow from one state to the next. Oops, there it goes. And then from stop recording, we go to process with Lex. Process with Lex, what was it called again? The send audio input to DialogBot. It has 3 transition labels, so it can transition based on 3 different activities that happened. We're just going to drag it from the on response ready. So it is important to make sure you're dragging it from this one. You can drag it from these other ones, a transition, but that's not what we're doing in this one. And from this play response state, you don't want to go back to the on AWS SDK ready, because again, we only need that to fire once in our scene, and once it starts, it will be set for the duration of the played scene. So all we need to do is loop it back to the wait for input. So let me describe quickly what's happening, and then we'll try it out. As soon as we press play, it'll go to this wait for input, meaning it's going to be waiting for us to press the space bar. Once it does, it'll transition to the start recording. It will start recording our voice, and if you're doing this following along, you make sure that you got to enable your microphone on your computer. I'm actually using this microphone right here, and so I had to go into my Chrome settings and make some special settings to make sure that it was using this microphone as the input. So if you're having issues with that, make sure that your settings are correct with whatever browser you're using. And so it will start recording using this mic, and then it will stop recording as soon as I let up on the space bar, and then it will transition to, let's see, actually I have that backwards. Let's see, let me back that up. It will start recording, and as soon as I let up on the space bar, it'll transition to this state, which says stop recording, and then it transitions quickly to process with Lex. So then all of this information, whatever you just spoke into the microphone, the recording that it made, it'll send it to Lex, it'll process it, and it will spin it back here over to the play response, and it will play that response from Lex. So there's actually a whole lot going on here between several services, and it's happening super, super fast. And then once it plays the response, which is a speech from our host, it will then go back to the wait for input, so we can continue doing that, having the dialogue with our hosts. I'm going to go ahead and stop and make sure that I have everything set up here correctly. So I have the chatbot attached to my hosts. I will open up the behavior. Select, just a side note, using the assets panel is super handy. So I selected the behaviors filter, then I'm unfolding the default pack, and I'm opening up this chatbot behavior. These other behaviors were created from other tutorials and other demos, but there we go. So that's how we get it back. All right, so let's give this a shot. I'm going to leave open the state machine editor so you can actually see how it's transitioning between all these different states. Oh, and one thing I must say before we get started with this is that Amazon Lex, it depends on your pronunciation and how well it can register what you're saying. So sometimes it has to try a few different times. And so if it doesn't understand what I'm saying, you have to try again a couple times, just depending on your response.
I'll also add to that Amazon Lex only supports input from English. So if you're trying to use a different language to start an interaction, then that won't work at this point.
Gotcha. Cool. And this will, I can almost promise you, I'm not going to pronounce something quite well enough, and he's going to say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying." So
really quickly, I'm going to interrupt you, Jake. We had a question from DJ MK on the chat about browser support in Safari. The best browsers to use for Amazon Sumerian are the latest version of Chrome and the latest version of Firefox -1. That's what we support today. So Amazon Sumerian uses a framework library for WebVR that allows you to connect to the hardware and use the controllers and things like that and operate your scene through the browser. Safari doesn't support that today. And so if you want to create a scene in Safari, you would be able to do that, but there's going to be some limited interaction that can happen, and you're not going to get the full range of features. So using, as I said, the latest version of Firefox or Chrome are going to give you the best results. We commonly use Chrome just because we find that there are a little bit better stability with that browser today, but if you're getting started, those are the ones I would recommend.
Yeah, that's a good question. We get a lot, and of course, it's a really important question for VR specifically, and also just when you're running VR scenes live in browser. There's just a lot going on. So yeah, your browser is an important part of that. All right, going back to the state machine. See how the wait for input state is highlighted? That means it's waiting for me to press down the space bar to then initiate recording. So let's see how this goes. We'll press the space bar. And it did not work. Let me stop and start again. And once it gets going, there we go. Wait for input again. Make a hotel reservation.
What city will you be staying in?
San Francisco.
What day do you want to check in?
5/23/2018.
How many nights will you be staying?
3.
How many nights will you be staying?
4.
Sorry, I am not able to assist at this time.
5 nights.
Sorry, what can I help you with?
All right, so it actually reset. I'm going to put my headphones on so I can actually hear him. Yeah, so one thing I've also noticed is that numbers are just hard to pronounce correctly. So let's try the other path. So we did look at, so you see how it's working with the hotel reservation part. So remember there are your book hotel intents, and then, so it followed down this path. So I initiated using this book hotel intent, and then it goes down using these, started with this utterance, and then it went down with these slots, and it responded to me based on my inputs. Now let's try the book car path, or the book car intent. So we'll jump back here. I'm going to go ahead and stop and start just in case. And let's give it a shot here. Press the space bar to start. Book a car.
In what city do you need to rent a car?
San Francisco.
What day do you want to start your rental?
5/23/2018.
What day do you want to return the car?
5/25/2018.
What day do you want to return the car?
5/24/2018.
Sorry, I am not able to assist at this time.
Oh, well, come on, Luke. But you get the idea. So it actually is, and it depends on how the way you have it set up and your utterances and your slots. And so it kind of depends on the type, what you say, and how I might not have actually set it at length enough, so give it enough space in between 5/22/2018 and so forth. So yeah, it is dependent on your input and how that works. But you get the idea. It is actually working. It's responding. I'm having a conversation with me, with the host. And yeah, so that's the basics of setting up a chatbot. The last thing I want to do is set up a camera. So actually, when we play our scene, it goes and fixes straight on the host, and so that's the view we'll get of him every single time. So it feels more like a personal interaction. So to do that, we'll go ahead and click Create Entity. We'll select the fixed light. There it is, or the fixed cam. And I'm going to make it over here. I have the fixed cam selected. I can close out the state machine. I'm going to select it as the main camera, and then I'm going to follow the editor cam. Actually, I'm not going to follow the editor cam. I take that back. going to move him so it's nice and close. Oh, I'm in play mode. That's the problem. Stop my scene. And we'll place it just about there. Okay. All right, and then let's see. So it is set as the main camera, and I will go back to the default camera. Actually, hold on. I'm mixing this up. All right, I'm going to now unselect follow editor camera for the fixed cam, and then I'm going to go to edit, but I'm keeping it as the main camera, and then I'm going back to my default camera. And I'm going to exit out here, and you see my fixed cam right there, looking at him. And then when I press, I'll open up the chatbot again, toggle on the state machine. When I press play, and just position this nicely so we can see what's going on here. Okay, press play. Ah, I see what happened. One thing I forgot to do. Let me bring back my inspector panel by clicking this button over here. He's still looking at the default camera. So I want him looking at the fixed cam that I set up. So I need to go back to, where is he? Luke, there he is. And then open up the host component. I'm going to remove the target entity, the default camera, and then